3. KV-1 tank. In 1941, the Nazis pushed their way into Russia and headed toward the city of Leningrad, known today as St. Petersburg. They destroyed numerous Soviet air bases along the way. They encircled the city with the goal of cutting its inhabitants off from supplies and food, and essentially starving the Red Army into surrendering. The siege was carried out as part of Hitler's grand plan to conquer Russia, known as Operation Barbarossa. It lasted for nearly 2.5 years. The Red Army took some heavy hits, especially during the first few months. But the Nazis weren't expecting the Soviets to put up much of a fight and were taken slightly off guard by the Red Army's fierce resistance to German occupation. The Russians had some key advantages that helped them stand their ground in their 872-day-long siege. One of these advantages was exceptional tank technology. At the time, Clermont-Voroshilov 1 or KV-1 tank functioned as the Red Army's standard heavy tank. It was developed after the Soviet military experienced disappointing results with its previous tank, the T-35, which proved to be slow and mechanically unreliable. The 50-ton KV-1 tank was far superior to any of the Nazis' military vehicles, including the Panzer Tanks, which were formidable in their own right. German anti-tank weapons were largely ineffective against the K1, owing to its heavy armor, which was 3.5 inches thick in some places, and enabled Soviet tank crews to hold up the enemy for days at a time. KV-1 tanks served alongside KV-2 heavy assault tanks. Both vehicles weren't developed at the same time. The KV-2 was equipped with a bigger gun, which made it heavier and therefore slower and far less effective in combat than the KV-1. It was also much more vulnerable to being captured by the Nazis. Only 200 to 250 KV-2s were ever produced. The KV-1 had its own share of disadvantages. As durable as it was against enemy gunfire, the Varmeks nevertheless managed to destroy 29 of them with explosive charges and direct fire artillery, and the Soviets lost hundreds of the tanks in battle. It was also designed in a hurry. Writing for Armor magazine in 2002, Stephen Sewell described the KV-1 as a death trap. He further explained that many Red Army commanders were afraid of offending the tank's designer, Josef Kotin, so they avoided telling him about the true extent of the vehicle's problems. Military officials eventually began to speak up, and Kotin set out to resolve the issues with the help of engineer Nikolai Shashmurin. Their solution was the development of the faster and lighter KV-1S tank. Equipped with thinner armor and a smaller turret, it made up for some of its predecessor's shortcomings, although the changes made it more like a slow medium tank than a speedy heavy tank. All the KV series tanks were expensive to produce, and as the war dragged on, the Soviets designed less expensive tanks that performed better in combat. Production of the KV tanks ultimately fell in favor of the T-34 medium tank, which was just as effective against the Germans but was much lighter and faster than the KV tanks. It became extremely popular throughout the world, making it the most heavily produced tank of World War II and the second most produced tank of all time. At least 39 countries acquired T-34s for their militaries, including Afghanistan, China, Cuba, Namibia, Finland, Vietnam, Yemen, Cyprus, and more. The KV-1S served as the basis for the development of the Joseph Stalin 1 or IS-1 later in the war. At the time, German tank power was improving, and Stalin felt the need to manufacture a new heavy armored vehicle to maintain the Soviet Union's tank superiority over the Nazis. The IS-1 was the first of at least 7 IS series heavy tanks that were developed throughout World War II as breakthrough vehicles. The IS-1 had an upgraded engine that helped to increase its speed along with several other improvements, but it also had several shortcomings. Capable of firing only 2 rounds per minute due to its slow reload rate, it was ineffective as a tank destroyer. But its ammunition was highly explosive, which made the tank ideal for assaulting and blowing up enemy bunkers. Heavy tanks fell out of favor after the war ended, when they were rendered obsolete by the T-34 and other medium tanks, which were far more practical, quicker, and easier to operate and maneuver. But both the KV series and the IS series tanks proved critical to carrying the Soviet Union through the conflict and to the Allied victory. and while they both had considerable flaws, they served their purpose well. 2. T-14 Armata. Russia owns the world's largest stockpile of tanks, most of which are aging and obsolete Soviet relics that wound up in storage yards after the Soviet Union fell. In recent years, the country's military has started to undergo some major modernization efforts, and officials flex as often as possible about these new developments to make sure that the US and the rest of the world know about them. One of the focal points of Russia's bragging is the T-14 Armata tank. It was designed to replace the aging T-95 model, which was cancelled in 2010, and the military claims that it will be the best and most advanced tank in the world once it enters service. Designed over a 5-year period, the prototypes can accommodate a 3-person crew and are each equipped with an unmanned turret. It's armed with a cannon, a gun that's capable of taking down low-flying aircraft, and a secondary armament consisting of a remote control machine gun that's capable of shooting either 300 or 1,000 rounds. There's enough storage room for 1,000 extra rounds of ammunition. The diesel-powered T-14 has an alleged maximum speed of 51 miles per hour and an operational range of 311 miles. To protect the crew, the vehicle is outfitted with explosive reactive armor, which is designed to respond to an impact in a way that reduces damage as much as possible. In a modern step up from Russia's past tanks, it has a computerized control system and combat software designed to detect, analyze, and automatically respond to threats. It's also capable of correcting operational errors among crew members. The tank's Active Protection System, APS, consists of an extremely high-frequency radar system for detecting, tracking, and intercepting anti-tank munitions. It reportedly protects the tank on all sides, but not from above, leaving the vehicle and its crew members vulnerable to an attack from the air. Some Russian sources claim that the T-14's APS is effective against advanced armor-piercing rounds. The Russian Ministry of Defense backed these claims, but many experts remain skeptical. The deputy director of Uralvagonzavod, the company tasked with building the tank, has also made some claims about the T-14 that are difficult to believe. In 2015, he said that the tank will be coated with radar-absorbing paint and other features that'll make it invisible to radar and infrared detection. To keep sensitive information from prying ears, T-14 crews will communicate with one another and with their command post on a highly secure channel. The vehicle is supposedly entirely Russian-made, but in 2015, cybersecurity intelligence analysts uncovered evidence that the T-14's developers struggled to obtain the night vision equipment they needed within the country. Hackers have revealed Russia's past attempts to buy the parts from a French supplier. Obtaining these parts may have gotten even more difficult as the country faces sanctions for its invasion of Ukraine. An unmanned version of the tank is supposedly in development, but this is slightly hard to believe when Russia has failed to employ even a fraction of the 2,300 manned T-14s that it claimed would enter service between 2015 and 2020. In 2018, the date for getting this done was pushed back to 25, and at one point the entire project was put on hold. But in 2021, Russian officials said that production would begin in 2022. It's unclear where the project currently stands, and the T-14's absence amid Russia's ongoing invasion of Ukraine is telling. Only a handful of these tanks are known to actually exist. They were first spotted in 2015, shortly before a planned appearance in a parade. While rehearsing for the event, one of the tanks stalled. It started back up and drove under its own power after attempts to tow it failed. It definitely wasn't a good look for a vehicle that's supposed to be the world's most sophisticated tank, but if some of the claims that the Russians are making about the tank are true, then it'll bring Russia a lot closer to competing with American military technology. Until relatively recently, few experts seemed worried about this possibility. But now, some analysts are legitimately concerned that the T-14 could outcompete NATO's main battle tanks. Either way, it's a much different design from past Russia and Soviet-era tanks, which were essentially known for being cheap and expendable. The shift to more advanced and expensive features perhaps symbolizes a shift in the country's military priorities, or an increased determination to increase its standing as a world superpower. Even if the tank's technology turns out to be impressive, some are already questioning whether the Russian military will acquire many of the vehicles, and the future of the T-14 Armata remains uncertain. So far, the army is only committed to buying a few of the tanks, and in 2022, the country's state-owned arms manufacturer began marketing the vehicle for export. 1. Merkava and Narma tanks. Development of the Merkava series main battle tanks for the Israel Defense Forces (IDF) began in the 1970s after negotiations to buy Chieftain Tanks from the United Kingdom fell through. With its engine in the front rather than the back, and its turret set further back than most conventional tanks, the Merkava more closely resembled some infantry fighting vehicles than an actual tank. Its unusual layout enables crew members to quickly enter and exit the vehicle, but makes its engine more accessible to enemy forces. A direct hit to the front of a Merkava tank would probably disable it, but probably wouldn't render it immobile, according to national interest writer Charlie Gao. On the other hand, in the event of needing to evacuate, the ability to make a quick exit through the rear of the vehicle could prove to be advantageous. One of the major issues the Merkava ran into during its early service years was the catastrophic result of an ammunition hit. Most of the tank's ammunition load is stored in the fire-resistant containers in the hull, with the more modern variation storing a limited number of rounds in the turret. In this sense, the Merkava was designed more as a defensive tank. Offensive designs like the American M1 Abrams typically store their ammo in the turret and can be reloaded much faster. Despite any of its disadvantages, the Merkava is considered one of the best designed tanks of all time. Protecting the crew was a top priority for its designers, who equipped the tank with thick, solid armor. It was also armed with a turret-mounted main gun, along with a slightly higher than average ammo supply of 62 rounds, as well as 3 machine guns. The Merkava first saw combat in the 1982 Lebanon War, and it performed well against the Soviet-built T-72 tanks that fought under the Syrian military. As the Israeli military frequently encountered conflict over the following years, it continuously improved upon the Merkava's design. The newest version, the Merkava 4 Barak Lightning, is slated to enter service in 2023. The Merkava's design served as the basis for the development of the world's most heavily armored personnel carrier, known as the Narma. As part of the modification process, the Merkava's turret and main gun were removed and its armor was strengthened. Armor side skirts were added to protect the top of its treads, and its traditional hull was replaced by a V-shaped design for maximum undercarriage protection. The Narma is also equipped with the Israeli Trophy Active Protection System, which uses radar to detect and repel incoming projectiles, as well as machine guns and smoke grenade launchers. It's capable of traversing over challenging terrain, but was also designed for maximum survivability in a crowded urban environment. These seemingly impenetrable vehicles are better armed than the newest and most advanced Merkava tanks. Narmas first entered service starting in 2008, but have been implemented in limited numbers due to budget constraints. Despite any financial limitations it may face, the Israeli government has continued to focus on improving its military technology. In addition to the up-and-coming Merkava 4, the Defense Ministry announced in 2021 that the first production phases of a new 8-wheeled armored personnel carrier are underway. Dubbed the Iton, the lightweight vehicle contains a combination of features borrowed from both the Merkava and Narma tanks. It's armed with improved security features and was also designed with mobility in mind, reaching a top speed of 56 miles per hour. The Iton will replace the Israel military's aging M113 armored personnel carriers, which have been in service since the 1960s. Thanks for watching. Which one of these tanks is your favorite? Tell us in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time. Bye.